The summer is setting. The preseason is around the corner. Welcome to the season premiere of Chucking Darts, where we predict the most important improvements across the NBA in the 2024-2025 season. This is Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. I forgot to check what number this episode is, but it'll be in the liner notes because this has been on hiatus as I've had my summer and my off season. Let's call it episode 211. That sounds nice. But
I like it.
what's important is that Esfandiar Baraheni,
Yep.
a man of many media outlets in the past, is coming back to discuss most improved player,
Yep.
the players in his mind that are geared up not only to contend for the award this coming season, but to make meaningful improvements that don't necessarily get votes, but may result in wins. That's what we're doing. I'm very excited. But I apologize. I should have covered this in the pre-show. What are you up to now, media-wise? How are you, and what can people be looking forward to from you?
Oh my God. This year is gonna be insane. In a good way. I'm just gonna be extremely busy. I likely will not be able to talk to my wife for weeks at a time, but it will be
Okay.
very a lot. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
That's
Hopefully,
what
she,
busy in a good way means,
she
huh?
hears me through the walls. Yeah, no. I think it's gonna be very busy. I can't like hard say I'm doing this yet. Some of the stuff that I did last year I will be doing. Some stuff I'm still just trying to sort out and
Okay.
confirm essentially. But I'm excited for a lot of it. You can find me doing Raptors Republic stuff. You can find me writing for Forbes, doing some Bleacher Report content, things like that. But yeah, there's a lot to do, and I'm hyped. I'm very hyped for it. Very
And
excited.
I forget the timing of it, but this
Yeah.
year you also made your debut as a sideline reporter, did you not?
So I actually made that last year.
Yeah, this past, yeah.
Yeah. CBL, Canadian Elite Basketball League, was doing some
Mhm.
sideline reporting for them, which was awesome. Did like look being able to hear the stories and journeys of some of these guys who are trying to make it to the NBA and are mostly like G League quality players who are looking for a summer league basically to play in. The CBL is right there for that, and it's really competitive. They have a unique target score or elam ending kind of
Mm.
ending that they have for each game, which makes things kind of exciting. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, man, and to be able to do the whole TV analyst sideline report thing, that's a dream, honestly, to be able to do it hopefully for the NBA one day. So we'll
Yeah.
see, man.
I
We'll
mean,
see what
because
happens. Yeah.
you've basically sideline reporter, you've done some studio stuff, you've written,
Yeah.
podcaster. I mean, you can do it all, basically, is what I'm telling
Yeah,
you.
I would jack of all trades, master of
Of
none
all trades,
is
jack of all
of all
trades,
trades.
master of all trades is
I am
what
your
I would say to you.
I am Switchblade, shout out to, a little reference
Yeah,
here, a
yeah,
little
yeah.
hint,
Stay
Chuck,
tuned. Stay tuned.
Um, stay tuned. I am OG. I am OG. No, I appreciate you, man. Thank you. A lot of stuff is like just trying to get sorted out. But we are diving full into this freelance life, which is very interesting and challenging in its own right, and trying to figure out what to do. But hey, that's the world of sports media nowadays.
Yes, it
Nobody
is.
is safe. Nobody is safe, including Zachary Lowe.
Yeah, I was wondering if he was gonna come up. We won't belabor it because I think
Yeah,
Zach,
yeah,
everyone has good things to say about Zach,
for sure.
including us, I imagine. But
Yeah.
just Zach will land on his feet, obviously,
Yes, he
because
will be okay. Yeah, he'll be
everybody
okay.
loves him and everyone knows how good he is. And I think
Yeah,
he has friends in high places to where he'll get an opportunity. But
for sure. Yeah.
just, thankful that the low post was there for as long as it was. Obviously, a great resource for anyone who's trying to learn anything about the game.
Yeah.
I could go on a tirade about ESPN, but that wouldn't be anything new. Everyone
Yeah.
knows what the deal is there. So
Honestly, it says more about not just ESPN, but like everything that's sports media related, right?
yeah,
What direction we're heading with a lot of that stuff, which is it's a fair discussion to have, and maybe one we can have at some point. But we're talking about most improved, man. We're talking about improvement here. Talking
that's
about
right.
growth, you
That's
know?
right. There's always room to improve, no matter who you are. Even if you're Zach Lowe, I'm sure he would say that
Yeah.
he has room to improve.
He probably is downing a beer right now, saying, what could I have done?" Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So now that we've crushed that transition and we have our podcasting muscles are nice and spry now. So for those who didn't listen to you when you came on towards the end of last season, you wrote an article for Forbes where you basically, which I loved, which was three all NBA teams, but four most improved. The most
Yeah.
improved player award just goes to one person every year. It has historically been an award that has been kind of, I think, sort of a second tier award. And so there hasn't been that much scrutiny into what goes into it. And
Yeah.
what I loved about you is you your premise was basically, look, there's improvement all over the league that matters a lot every single season.
Yeah.
There's more than enough room to talk about a lot of guys that have sort of changed not only their own careers but the course of their teams. And so let's do that. And you hit on Derek White and Jalen Suggs and Jalen Williams and Jonathan Kuminga and Max Strus and Jalen Johnson, like
Yeah.
a ton of players that we talked about from your article. And so what we want to do now is not to like split it up into teams, so to speak, but to highlight the players whose improvements we both expect the most and that we're looking forward to the most. And so I think as a disclaimer, we need to mention Victor Wembanyama, who is sort of much like as he does literally on the court, sort of looms over this
Yes.
discussion.
Yeah.
I think he's the favorite to win the award. And this episode isn't so much about handicapping the award as much as just talking about general improvement. But uh, just quickly, how drastic an improvement do you expect from Victor Wembanyama?
So I've thought about this, but not to the extent that maybe like a person would imagine we think about Victor Wembanyama. He had an incredible Olympics, right? Which was really fun to watch. It seemed like he seemingly cared about what happened with France and how far they ended up going in this, which naturally is like has that competitive drive, has that spirit. These are all like the intangible things that you want from a superstar player. Um, Everything on the court speaks for itself. I'm curious to see how much more he gets used as a ball handler, especially with Chris Paul there. How much more he's able to be as this kind of like free safety. Are they going to commit to him just being the full-time starting center next year? Because at least for half of last year was him and Collins kind of splitting duties. And so we'll see how that ends up shaking out. Like if they're just going to commit to, having Chris Paul, Wemby, Harrison Barnes, Devin Vassell, and then Sohan as their starting five. That does give them a lot of utility defensively, I think. Not just in Wemby, but in the kind of surrounding players that they have around him, which makes me think he's going to take a bigger leap defensively. And I would not be surprised if the man walks away with Defensive Player of the Year next year because he made a pretty good run for it last year, too. Um, I think that's where we see the major leap is just how impactful he is on the defensive end with a team that might be a little bit better defensively around him. Offensively, it's still sort of a playground. And I guess, like, I'm not trying to go deep on Wemby because we know what Wemby can be. Ultimately, the question is, all right, so by the end of last season, he was like a top 20, top 15 maybe player. I don't know, wherever you put him.
Sure.
What does he end up being? Top 10? Does he end up putting himself into top 5 conversations? That would be a stretch to me, I think, but hey, who knows, man? Like he's going to be incredible. It just depends on when, not, when.
Yeah. It it feels like it it can't be this smooth in a sense. Like you can't, because he improved so much during his rookie year.
Yeah.
And you almost think, because you think about the cliches, right? Where it's like improvement isn't linear. That's one of the things you hear. It's more like, one step forward, half step back, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think if that is going to apply to him, and I'm not saying that it will, if it's going to apply to him, it has to do with the offensive end of the floor. Because the offensive end of the floor, which is sort of previewing where we're going with the rest of this, just increasingly dictates, especially regular season, where improvement really lies. The more sort of usage you can handle as an offensive player is
Totally.
where you traditionally see really, really big gains. Tyrese Maxey won this award last year, for example. But
Yep.
uh, in having Chris Paul and Trey Jones that are in that rotation at point, obviously that takes reps away from Sohan. That was the big narrative last year, is that Sohan at point wasn't working out. I'll just say that, at this stage of his career, Chris Paul's that is, Chris Paul needs Victor Wembanyama a lot more than Victor Wembanyama needs Chris Paul. I think I would start there. And it's not to say that Chris can't make it work or that he can't be useful in this sort of timeshare with Trey Jones. But Chris is known, known for being very specific about where he wants his big to be and about what he wants his big to do. He hasn't
Yeah.
played with a player remotely, number one, as talented as Wembanyama, but number two, as sort of like fanciful as Victor is with his skill set. And so some of that can be good about, I think Chris could probably get Victor to really master his footwork as a roller by just repping it out over and over and over again. And I think
Yep.
that could draw its own gravity and be very useful to him. Victor last year, one of the biggest things about his offensive game was that he was a preposterous, like pull up 3-point shooter, shooting threes off the dribble. Like they really went in for him. It's his catch and shoot numbers that were not good. Uh, and so maybe there's some regression there, but I just can't shake the feeling that even if Chris helps a little bit, the overall picture will be Victor's going to play the way that Victor wants to play. It's going to be more incumbent on Chris to fit around Victor than vice versa. And whether or not, even though I think Chris wants to make it work, like whether there's a little bit of stylistic friction there, more than people are
Yeah.
giving credit. Um, I'll leave it at that because I
Yeah.
think, Victor's got to figure out where his dominant areas on the ball are on the floor. Like, where does he want to set up shop consistently? I think all that stuff is still sort of to be determined. That would be the most, I guess, I don't know if it's importance the right word. The area of improvement I will be looking forward to the most is if he establishes an area of the floor with the ball that he likes to operate in the most and how much Chris and Trey help set him up in that area. And there's lots of different answers to that question because Victor's insane. But
Yeah.
that's what I would say about him.
I'm excited for, well, I don't even know if excited is the word either, but I think to your point, the structure could be both a benefit and a detriment to some of the things that Wemby can do. Like I talked about that playground with him where it's like just experimentation at this point offensively. Some of that experimentation will get taken away.
Yeah.
And so maybe that puts a limit on what he can do offensively, but maybe that improves some of the efficiency as well. And so when it comes to most improved, they will look at efficiency. They will look at, a guy who I can't even remember what his numbers were to end the season, but
Me neither,
it
man.
was preposterous. It was like 25, 10 and 5 or something, and the 5 was blocks, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um and so if it's those type of numbers for an entire season and they're more fine-tuned efficiency wise, you could see that being the case for most improved. I personally am not a big fan of the whole number one pick that just kind of walks
I
into
know.
We've
I
had this
know.
conversation before.
I know. We
Yeah,
disagree a little bit
I
about
know,
this, but yeah,
I know.
yeah.
But I also understand the whole like star to superstar leap is very difficult. It's part of the process. Whatever. It's okay. Um, yeah, I don't know. Wemby's gonna be great, man. Wemby's
He
gonna
is
be
going to be.
awesome.
I'll say this. I expect, and maybe it being an expectation sort of discounts the improvement because I think people like to be surprised with most improved. Isn't
True.
this
Yeah.
such a pleasant surprise? But then again, what are we doing in this episode? Things we're trying to predict it. Here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right.
Bloviating. I would say that I would expect him to be a second team All NBA player. That's
I
what I
like
would
it.
say.
I like it.
Just because the numbers will be what the numbers are. I was assuming and obviously hoping for health.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's where I'd expect him to be. But now that we've done our obligatory Wemby segment,
Right.
uh, today's episode brought to you by. No, I still don't have sponsors. Not going after that.
Oh,
Not this
I
season,
really, I
everybody.
really thought I was gonna sit here and listen to the. Oh man, you got me hyped. You got me
Whatever. It's brought to you by freelance artist
hyped.
Esfandiar Baraheni.
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
Blue Lips by Schoolboy Q. Buy now on on Amazon and
Oh
whatever.
man.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the other sort of players, and this will be just sort of the award section of the episode.
Yeah.
The players who typically win the award are guys who usually make the all-star team for the first time. You go back, it's Lauri Markkanen or Pascal Siakam or
Yeah.
John Moran.
Brandon Ingram.
That's
Right. Yeah.
Brandon Ingram. That's right. That has been the trend of over the last 10 years. Is
Yeah.
it's first time all stars. So in that respect, I'll kick it to you if you've got a list of guys who you think could qualify for that. Who are you looking for? Who
Yeah.
do you feel most strongly about cracking that first time all star list?
Oh man. So there's from the list I have here, I think there's three guys that could genuinely qualify for that, and a fourth that is sort of on the fringe. And I want to get your opinion on him because he's near and dear to my heart. Okay. The first guy,
Mm-hmm.
former number one overall pick, if we're leading up on that discussion. His team, in my opinion, has improved around him this summer.
Mm-hmm.
Added some spacing, added some shooting. Re-signed a couple of guys who I think were important to the second half of the season. Health has not been a big, health has been a big issue for this player, but he just received a massive contract as well.
Yeah.
I do think that there is a lot of skepticism around Cade Cunningham,
Mm-hmm.
and I think some of it is warranted. Is he the Luka Doncic light that people expected coming out of the draft? No. But can he become an all-star in this league? I think that's an absolutely type of thing. Yes, he needs to improve his efficiency and just his overall efficiency carrying the ball and not turning it over. But ultimately, I do think some of the stuff that we saw at the second half of the season, especially when a guy like Simone Fontecchio joined the squad, you saw the turnover rate dip a ton. And to me, that just signaled, okay, space equals more efficiency for a guy like Cade Cunningham. And I think with a coach like JB Bickerstaff, I think with guys like Tobias Harris and Michael Beasley on the roster, Malik Beasley, not Michael Beasley. Michael Beasley just did a podcast with Jeff Teague. And he's in the big three.
Hell yeah, baby.
Great lefty though. Shout out to Michael Beasley. Malik Beasley, great shooter. I think he shot 40% for Milwaukee last season. I imagine he'll get some run. Tim Hardaway Jr. also will get some run. I think that will help the context of the Pistons, specifically when it comes to Cade. And I could see him becoming a first-time All-Star this year. So that is my case for Cade Cunningham out the door. I also there's two other guys that should be in this conversation, but I'm curious to see if you have them in there. So
yeah. So I think Cade is going to get an overall, you would hope, organizational competency bump just because so many things that
went terribly.
Yeah, so many things were working against them from the top down over his first few years there. And since this is whole new regime, new GM, new coach, lots of new members of the rotation, hopefully what that means is, they're not going to be playing two bigs so much anymore, or
Yeah.
two bigs plus Asar Thompson anymore.
Yeah.
And so they just sort of get very basic NBA principles to be working around Cade all the time, even if having Fontecchio and Tobias Harris, aren't the best secondary options. They are NBA secondary options. And I think his true shooting, which was it was around 50%, which is very, very low his first couple
Yeah.
years, went up to just under 55 last year. He's getting to league average about that. And that was still
Not, it was below. Yeah.
but still a very bad circumstance last year. So, you know, I I find the general push and pull around Cade to be kind of tiring. I think if you watch him for an extended period, you see that he's a good two-way player
Yeah.
already, just a horrific circumstance. I think all-star for him is possible. I would probably say not this year, just because I don't think the Pistons are going to be good enough for him to get he might be mentioned in sort of like
The
honorable
snub.
mentions,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but I'd be surprised. They would have to really be like, could the Pistons make the play in for him to get that
Right.
kind of love? And I just don't think they're quite there yet. Mainly having to do with how they manage Ivy, Asar, Duran, Ron Holland.
Yeah.
These are still a lot of players who really don't shoot yet. And that's still going to be, but they all have to play, you would
Yeah.
think. So there's
Do
still
they
some
all have
uncertainty there.
does how much play does, like, minutes wise? How many minutes does Ron Holland get this season? Not in the Motor City Cruise. We're not talking about G League. Because I do think some G League time would actually benefit a guy like Ron Holland. But, like,
Yeah, good
you know,
question. I
especially because they feel very, very not stacked. Stacked is a wrong word for a team that is probably going to win 20 games. But they have a lot of wing depth, is my point. So
yeah.
a guy like Ron might not crack that rotation, at least initially, right?
Yeah, I think playing him next to Asar does not make a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to win games. Now, who knows how many games they are really trying to win. And so maybe that bumps up his minutes, but they have three number 5 overall picks, all like age 23 and younger.
It's crazy.
So
Yeah,
you
it's
would
wild.
think that they would want to play those players. If they are going to wait until the team has yet another top 5 pick next year to play Ron Holland, then I mean, is it going to be easier for him to crack the rotation next year? I don't know.
True.
That's why I think this still, even though there is hopefully a competency bump coming. Bickerstaff's not some offensive genius, but his teams in Cleveland were good.
Yeah.
Um, I still don't think that the team is really approaching its final form. What they really need
No.
is a second offensive option to run alongside Cade that complements Cade. One of Cade's great sort of, I guess, hype lines for his reputation as a prospect was that he could accommodate anyone. He could play alongside anybody, which I think is still true, but that still means you have to find that other player.
Right.
And unless Ivy, who has an argument for being on this list, but unless Ivy really takes a step forward, like Asar, that jumper, I'm just too skeptical of him being a big time top 2 offensive option. Asar
Yeah.
is a really cool player and can be a really valuable player, but to be a running mate
Yeah.
with Cade, I don't really think he's cut out to be that. And I think Ron, I'm kind of skeptical about that as well, but I think you have to play him alongside Cade just to see how they mesh. That's all. You
Right.
got to give it a chance to see if you have anything in Ivy, Holland, or Asar that can be that player, or if you're just going to try to draft him next summer. That would be my case for playing Ron, is to give him that audition. But we'll see.
Right. Okay. Well, if you don't think Cade's team will win enough,
Yeah.
I think this other guy well, these both of these two guys, actually, we could probably talk about them similarly. Both these guys will be on winning teams next season.
Okay.
One of them might be on one of the best teams in the Western Conference, maybe the
Mm.
best team in the Western Conference. So Chet Holmgren
Mm-hmm.
for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Evan Mobley on the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Ooh. Ooh.
So Mobley, obviously, I think most people expected the conversation that we're about to have about Mobley to happen last year, right?
I think we had this conversation
We
about him
probably
last
did
year.
have that conversation. Yeah, we honestly did. Yeah. So I think obviously the offense and the 3-point shooting is something that everybody brings up when it comes to Evan Mobley. I'm very curious to see how they are able to. Kenny Atkinson is able to unlock his passing a little bit more too, because I think that is a very underrated quality of Evan Mobley's game. I think that's what allowed him and Jared Allen, even though people like to say that they don't fit, I think when they have played well together, it is because of the passing chops of both Allen and Mobley that
Mm-hmm.
really allows that tandem to work. That being said, obviously the defense is a massive aspect. The Cavaliers are consistently a very good defensive team. I think part of that is Allen, part of that is Mobley. I'm very curious what offensive steps he takes in the strength department, not even the shooting department, just finishing around the basket stronger, being able to withstand contact. And it's funny because I actually am now recalling the conversation we had about him last year, and I'm just regurgitating the same point. So I'm not going to belabor it. Evan Mobley and Chet Holmgren, Chet is another guy who I would like to see more usage offensively for, more catch and shoot opportunities from three, more self creation opportunities. I think that will be at his disposal because Isaiah Hartenstein will be playing minutes next to him, and so Chet will be forced to be more of a perimeter player. It sort of feels like both of these guys will have to step out of their offensive comfort zone a little bit. Maybe Mobley, actually, definitely Mobley more than Chet, but both guys who I think might be in for a bit of a jump. So, thoughts, say you.
Lots of thoughts. Before we get into, can I just ask, who do you like better out of these two players? Because they play similar
Yeah.
positions and there's similar concerns about each, although Chet notably is further along shooting threes.
Yeah.
So in general, who do you like more?
It's funny because before Chet Holmgren came into the league, it was Evan Mobley, and then as soon as Chet came into the league, it was Chet. I am very very impressed with what I saw with Chet last season. I think there is a legitimate chance, especially with how well OKC is expected to play this season, that he becomes an All Star this year. Now, for what it's worth, maybe that ends up being Jalen Williams, which might be another guy that we talk about. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I think there is. I see the upside offensively for a player like Chet Holmgren more than I see the upside for a player like Evan Mobley. And ultimately, I think the defense is comparable, and that is why I lean with Chet, essentially.
Okay. So on that point, I think I'm probably in the minority because I still prefer
You, Mobley. Yeah.
Mobley.
Okay.
But that I could be holding on to my priors because
This is
I
good podcasting. Why not? Let's do it. Yeah.
this is respectful discourse.
Yeah.
Respectful discourse.
Yes. Yes.
So number one, it's interesting because Mobley has had this question about playing alongside Allen his whole career. As after Allen got hurt in the middle of that Orlando series in the first round, I think it's easy to forget that like Cleveland won a playoff series, like they progressed, whatever you want to say about the Magic. And I think
Absolutely.
most people like the Magic. Like Cleveland did beat them without Jared Allen and with Evan Mobley playing the five. And he had a game sealing block on Franz Wagner in game five to win that game
Yep.
and was just a really good defensive anchor center in the back half of that series. And against Boston, they lose in 5 games, but he averages around, I think, 21 and 9, 21 and 9.5, and about 3 assists. So it's sort of like a subtle leap
Yeah.
because again, Evan was 22 years old. It was his third year in the league. And there wasn't as much attention on it because his team was overmatched. Like the Celtics were clearly better, but not many 22-year-olds can do that kind of thing. And I think when comparing him to Chet, one thing that Mobley does that Chet does not do yet, I'll just say yet, is
Yep.
that Mobley, even though they're both kind of skinny 7-footers, like Mobley can rebound the ball. He can rebound his position. That's never really been an issue for him. And
Yep.
with Chet, their big offseason acquisition was to compensate for that issue, which was
Yep.
why they got Hartenstein. And now there's a Mobley Allen dynamic a little bit on Chet's neck of the woods where they may think that those two won't share the floor, but I
Oh, they
promise you
will.
they will. I
They
mean,
absolutely will. Yeah. Yeah.
especially based on what you saw in the playoffs with Cat and Gobert and being able to
Yeah.
beat Denver, those two are going to share the floor. And OKC's style of play, which is like driving, kick, driving, kick, driving, kick. Everyone on the floor can make a decision. Like that is they're just going to need to adjust a little bit with that because Hartenstein's not going to be a threat to shoot. He's not
Yep.
even a threat to shoot that center backup Jalen Williams was. And
Yeah.
Jalen Williams and Chet occasionally shared the floor last year in the playoffs as well. So I think when you talk about improvement not necessarily being linear, I think Chet is kind of teed up for that discussion this year because I don't know that his numbers take the massive leap as he's trying to negotiate
Yeah.
playing next to Hartenstein in the ways that they do that. I also think that OKC's offense is so egalitarian where you're expected to just like Chet is not a player where the ball finds with like 7 seconds left and he cooks. They have that guy. They have their MVP candidate
Yeah.
doing that. And if anything, I think that J Dub, Jalen Williams, is probably more of a candidate for first time All Star status because I think he'll get a bit more of those reps than
Right.
Chet will. I just don't know that the Thunder necessarily, I mean, they're going to be great. These are all champagne problems, but I don't know that they are going to want Chet to be operating in ISO or like off the dribble that much, especially if there is a defender sagging off of Hartenstein, clogging the paint a little bit anyway.
Yeah.
And their offense will be more creative than that. I just don't know that the runway is open for like the offensive explosion for Chet, even though I think he's got the talent to do it. Um, Overall, Chet shooting might be the difference maker between him and Mobley, like down the line.
Well, that's
I
actually that's what I was gonna kind of bring up. I think
Go
like
for it. Go for it. Yeah.
if there is a version of this next year that's successful, it's him as a high volume guy. Like he took 4 last year. Now that I'm looking at it, he took 4 threes a game last year, and I think that number can be way higher. Like he could double that number next year, and I wouldn't necessarily be shocked. Just from a volume perspective, if let's go for 6.5, right? We don't even have to double it. Let's just go for 2 more shots, ideally off of the catch. I think there's a world where he still stays at that. He shot 37% last year, stays at that 36, 37, 38%. And you're looking at a guy who's high volume. Because I think that's the world where Chet and to your point, you were about to bring that up. That's the world where Chet surpasses Mobley as an archetype in that
Mm-hmm.
realm in the
Mm-hmm.
front court. I don't think that there will be ISO opportunities for Chet. I think he'll have to attack closeouts more, for what it's worth, and I think he'll have to do more with the ball in the sense that he's just going to be swinging it around the perimeter more often. But I think OKC's offensive identity shifting to having a short role player like Hartenstein who can make some plays himself in the middle of the floor will help get some easy looks for Holmgren too. So Holmgren, weak side, lob, catch, like that will be accessible too. I think yes, the 3-point shooting is valid, but also there might be some easy looks on the table that Chet will be able to get because of a guy like Hartenstein. Valid on the rebound stuff, by the way. I totally agree. I think that's an area where Mobley just is better, even though that was an area of concern a couple of playoff series ago for them too, right? Like that's why they lost against the Knicks.
Yeah.
Better against Orlando and Boston, but yeah.
So you think like sort of like dunker spot extended Chet, where maybe he starts in the corner
Right.
and then
Yeah.
can crash when Hartenstein's the middle of the floor. Yeah, I think certainly there can be some of that. Um, and that'd be great if he got that easy money. I think Chet might ultimately be the better player. I think this is all very close.
It is. Yeah,
Um,
it totally is. Yeah.
I even though I agree that he will take more this year, because I mean that's where I mean I'm sure that's what he's being instructed to do. That's what he wants to do.
Yeah.
It's just I'm in more believe it when I see it mode for a guy that like with that tall and that long, just becoming like a high volume 3 point guy. He's
Yeah.
always been a good shooter, but he's also always liked to put the ball on the deck.
Yeah.
And when Chet is at his most dangerous as an offensive guy to me is when he is going downhill and he can get to that spin and extend and finish because
Yeah.
there's not really way to defend that, you know. So I will if he can really get that volume up and hold those percentages, then yeah, I think he is the choice. I wonder if there is a little bit of a ceiling there where like 5 to 6 is about as much as he can do.
Right.
And I also want to see where those threes are coming from, if a lot of them are above the break or if they are setting him up in the corner.
Yeah.
He could get him up from the corner, but if they're setting him up in the corner a lot, he's also probably just not getting the amount of touches that he
Yeah.
would have gotten last year. I mean, the common refrain with guys like Mobley, Chet, Porzingis, Jaren Jackson, Miles Turner, to a lesser extent, Giannis, is that they are at their best offensively when they are the five and they are surrounded by shooting.
Hmm.
And so if you take Chet and just sort of if you subtract the amount of possessions per game where that's happening for him, then I think it's hard for it to all come together. It's the sort of thing where I think he might be a better player, but it's not quite reflected in the numbers yet this year. That's why I
Yeah.
think Jalen Williams might be the better bet for
For the
sort of the
first time All
counting
Star stuff.
stats for
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
I agree
But
with
it's
that actually. Yeah. I
good
agree with
good
that.
debate though. Like I do think most people probably agree with you, and it's a very reasonable case that Chet's the better long-term player. But
I'm high on Mobley too. It's very close. Like
oh, and
it's
I meant to say I do think Mobley will be a first-time All-Star this year. I
nice.
do think that. I think provided Cleveland is a top 4 to 5 seed, which I expect them to be,
Right.
then I think he will crack it this year. But there's stuff he has to commit to as well. A big reason why that Cleveland Orlando series was such a rock fight was in the back half of that series when he was the lone center, he wasn't making himself available on offense as much as he should have. That was a lot of Donovan Mitchell heroics. I mean, he really was unbelievable
Yeah.
towards the end of that series. He carried that team. And there were lots of periods where Evan just wasn't assertive, even in relocating when he would set screens and calling for the ball and all of that. It's one thing to not have a polished post game, but it's another to not vacate to the right area to make yourself a big target on a roll
Right.
or on a whatever. And so he does need to do that. I maintain faith that he will, but this might be the last year to really believe in like Evan Mobley 5-time All-Star, which is what I still believe in. But
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
see.
For sure.
We'll see.
It's a fun class, man. That 2021 class. I mean, like I'm not putting Scotty in this conversation because I think Scotty took his leap last year.
Mhm.
If he turns into an all NBA guy, that's great. But
He
I
made the
think
All-Star team, didn't he? Am
he
I?
did. He did.
He
Yeah.
did. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think if he had played enough games, he only got to 60 because of he got hurt towards the end of the year. He would have probably been in more consideration for MIP than um I mean he Maxi would have still won, but I think he might have got a little bit of love for the MIP stuff if he had played the requisite amount of games.
Probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think
I don't think he's part of this conversation for this year. I think this year is the growth linear is not true thingy that you were mentioning, and I completely botched that. Linear growth is not, but
Not always linear. Growth is not
thank you.
always linear.
Growth is not
Yeah.
always linear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, because he's going to be taking on a massive role, and they're going to have to. I mean, look, there's going to be an efficiency dip, and he's going to have to figure out how to be the number one guy. That like that with that world, you're not going to have the same glowy numbers that you usually have. So it'll be a process. It won't be a most improved type season. But anyways, that's off the mark. 2021 is just a very fun class. Very exciting.
It is. I think if there's any other player, I mean, there are other players from that class. I guess the one that I will turn to, we talked about this player last year,
Yeah.
and it's really just an entryway to talking about his team because if you're talking about most improved and what players can make leaps, perhaps the most relevant team in the league is the Houston Rockets, given the amount of talent that they've got.
Oh yeah.
Last year, we talked both about Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün preseason as candidates to make a big leap. I think Şengün, like, numerically made his, though he did not make the All-Star team. He got sort of that honorable mention
Yep.
attention. And it's funny because neither player got extended. That has not happened yet, as the Rockets are still trying to figure out. I think that they're just kind of sitting on their hands, like really, really waiting for a star to become available. Like, please, can a star become available so that we don't have to pay all these guys? But he established himself as more of a known quantity than Jalen did. Jalen had his great, last month of the season, but there's inherent skepticism given that being March and whatever. The Rockets weren't out of it, but a lot of teams that they were playing maybe were out of it. And throw in that you also have second year Amen Thompson, who when he got to playing, when Şengün went down, as basically a de facto center on offense and sort of an everything on defense, sort of a player we haven't seen much of in the NBA's history. The Rockets look very, very good. Jabari Smith is still there and like really improved his efficiency from a first year to a second year player.
Totally.
He's another person who can play as a five. I think him and Amen on the floor together, with Jabari providing the space for Amen to operate on the role, is very interesting. I mean, this team can go in a bunch of different directions. There's a world where I legitimately think the Rockets could win 50 games. I don't know that I would pick that, but they are only going to, like, Steven Adams is healthy for them this year. They are only going to get better, and they won 40 last year. So I guess we haven't mentioned like Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore.
Yeah, he's on my list of like most not award winner, but just have to mention. Yeah.
So if there's someone on this team improvement wise who you really think is going to separate themselves, like pop the most, who would you take?
It's tough, man. This is like you said, they can go in so many different directions, and I think based on what Ime Udoka has wanted from this team, especially defensively, they became a top 10 defense last year, right? Which compared to the year before that, pretty astronomical jump. I think Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks have a big, they played a huge part in that, but also the utility knife type of guys that they had, a Jae'Sean Tate. Tari Eason didn't play a lot, but like a Jae'Sean Tate stepping in there. Obviously, Amen Thompson stepping in and being a solid defender. Şengün taking some steps in that department to be a little bit more conservative, but also learning how to use his feet and drop, etc. Like that.
And
that was
shout out to Uncle Jeff Green on the bench, baby. Still putting in quality minutes.
Kicking. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, man. He played for the Sonics, Chuck. He played for the Sonics. I always, every time someone says that, I realize.
Wouldn't it be great if he lasted long enough to go finish back with the Sonics? That'd be incredible.
God, I think that's his goal in the back of his head. He doesn't tell anybody that, but that's his eventual goal, to go back and play for the green.
Literally cooler than LeBron playing with Braun. No disrespect, but I'd be more excited for that.
That would be cooler. I agree. Yeah, he has to be in the starting lineup too for game 1 in Seattle, just cause, Okay. I think the guy that I would lean with, and this isn't some hot take. This is really, I think a lot of people would agree with this, and it's Amen Thompson.
Mm.
The reason I say that is because, like you said, we just have not seen a player like this really in the NBA in a really long time. And I think if we were to go back and forth and list random guys that we know that maybe fit that archetype, we'd be going back for a really long time. We'd have to
Be a
sift
great
through.
podcast, man.
It
I'd have
would be.
fun.
It would be players that we think are somewhat like Amen Thompson. um, but I'm ultimately fascinated, and I'm really curious to see if they do. The Jabari Smith Jr. lineup with him would be really intriguing, but I'm also curious to see if him and Şengün can survive there on the court, because that opens up the world for him to just get more minutes. I know Şengün is going to be a huge part of this team, and so if there's a world where those two can play on the court together, kind of Amen as this short roll guy who can throw, and again, I'm not sure exactly how that works. I'm skeptical personally how that world kind of is explored. Maybe it's just as the utility knife off of the bench, 6-man type that can come in and be what Şengün is when Şengün is off the floor. And maybe just better defensively, more versatile defensively. And they go into these small ball lineups where he's just wreaking havoc. I think that's where Amen Thompson can thrive. He, in my opinion, can turn into a star. Is that this year? I'm not sure. I'm very skeptical that he'll make a star leap this year. But I think he will take a leap into maybe if we were talking about Şengün as like an honorable, we're talking about Amen Thompson as like an honorable. uh,
Fifth team all honorable.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I don't know. This guy seems to me like a dark horse to put himself in the MIP conversation. Similar to how Jalen Johnson was last year for the Hawks, where it was like, oh, Jalen Johnson can make some noise in this, and he eventually did.
Another one not to be forgotten is a first-time All-Star, by the way. Not that I am super into the Hawks win
Yeah,
total this year, but
he could. Yeah,
Jalen's good. I mean, they know what they have in him finally, and
yeah,
so
yeah.
we'll see. Yeah,
Yeah, his usage is going to be there for sure. I mean, with
yeah.
DeJounte gone, he's going to have a lot more touches. So, yeah, I'm just curious to see where Ime slots a guy like Amen. And then, like, to me, I agree with you. This team looks like a team that is really, really preparing for a trade because they have too many guys. And developmentally, at some point, there's this bell curve of like, okay, you're actually dipping that productivity curve. Shout out to
It's
economics, man. You know what I mean? Like,
diminishing marginal returns. Yes, of course.
diminishing marginal returns. I remember year one economics. And so this exists, and I think the Rockets are in
It's
that
our breakout
situation.
clip for my burgeoning TikTok channel that doesn't exist. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I think that actually exists with this Rockets team. We haven't even talked about Reed Shepherd, who should be a very fun rookie and
Yeah.
is not in the MIP conversation, but will be likely a very fun rookie year.
Yes, he
How do
will.
all of these guys play? Like, where are the minutes coming from? Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, great problem to have. And I think like it is one of the signature, so certainly for us and the sorts of players we like to track and follow, it is a signature question because you can learn a lot about player development and team building with this situation because it's really unprecedented. There has not been
Yeah,
a team with this number of talented young guys. You can say the Oklahoma City Thunder with Durant and Ibaka and Harden and Russ had more cumulative talent, more like Hall of Fame equity.
yeah,
But just in terms of number of guys that you could give minutes to who are young and improving, I think they are unprecedented in the history of the NBA.
yeah,
And so where I uh, approach it is like, look, number one, this team needs to know where it's getting its buckets from. It needs to know how to establish a good and consistent offensive identity. Because if you don't have that in the NBA, your ceiling is capped very, very quickly.
yeah,
So because they managed, and Şengün's defensive stats are always better than you think they are. I mean, like,
Yeah,
that's been the case throughout his time there, his 3 years there. I, even though I love Amen, I still think that like Şengün's their starting center opening night. I mean, that's not going to change. I think
for sure.
Amen starting is less of a question. And though there's a way for him to seize that role, and I'm not punting on the idea of him and Şengün being able to share the floor. I think it's very weird, but not
Yeah,
impossible because Şengün can draw help with his back to the basket.
yeah.
Anytime you can do that, you can kind of solve some sort of spacing issues around you if you know where to draw the help from and everything.
And a man is a great cutter, right? So like
He
off
is.
off ball, he can dart into traffic, and that helps that aspect too. Yeah,
And you could do, yeah, it's clunky, but I'm not, like I said, I wouldn't write it off. But even so, I still think that Şengün is just such a talented. If he's all of a sudden not playing as much, then where does the team reliably, like
yeah,
really reliably get its buckets? And I just, because there's lots of like maybes on that front and he is a certainty, I would still hone in on Şengün being the most likely to pop the most this season.
right.
Um, but look, where they go, I mean, it's incredible. Like I don't know. Could Jalen Green average like 22 this year? Yeah, I kind of think he could.
Yeah,
Could Jabari? Now Jabari, I had him number one in his draft year. I loved him. Still do love him, but I just don't think he's someone who I think is going to get squeezed usage wise because his natural game has not been to operate off the dribble.
yeah,
And now there's just too many guys on that team who have that skill set. And I just think that he's going to get squeezed in that respect. He'll still play a lot
yeah.
and be useful and be good, but I don't
Really
think,
important player for them too. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
I don't think that the real stats will be there for him to be in contention for the award. But Şengün, I I get I think I'm probably kind of more of a Jalen Green guy now than I was last year when I watched how he competed defensively at the end of last year.
Yeah,
I think he did enough there to like clearly separate himself from like Whitmore. I don't think Whitmore's really going to challenge him for his minutes. Whitmore's still crazy young.
yeah,
Um, and you still need someone who can shoot and defend along the perimeter. And I think this will be the year that he'll really show two-way value because he wants to get paid, and that's the way you
yeah,
do it. But the most certain guy is Şengün. I will go with that. But
yeah.
there's not a more athletic team in the NBA, and they have a coach that knows how to leverage a lot of athletic talent. So it will be fascinating to watch. They will be my number one league pass team, the Houston Rockets.
It's funny. I'm recalling a lot of our podcast preseason last year where we were very high on the Oklahoma City Thunder, and we were like, you know, I don't want to. We didn't want to jump out the gate and be like, this is a team that can win, 50 games, but it eventually happened, and we were kind of like, oh, they'll be bottom of the playoff, 6, 5 seed or whatever. They shattered those expectations, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
became the number one seed, right? And so maybe that's the world we see for the Houston Rockets, where me and you were talking, we're like, okay, this is the year they won 40 games last year. Maybe this year they're at 45, 46, 47, and they're 5-6 in the Eastern Conference. Maybe they are that one wild card team that tends to break out in the West.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
so I they seem like a good bet to do that for what it's worth.
if they are, then Şengün will make an all-star team, and he will
Yeah,
be in serious contention for this award because I still don't think any
yeah.
player on that team is better offensively than him.
Yeah, I agree.
So
And he was essential, especially the first 40 to 50 games of the year. He was essential to everything they did. Like the Fred VanVleet Şengün pick and roll was probably one of the most used actions in the league last year.
mhm.
And I think that element, Ime Udoka understands that is the bread and butter of their offense, so to speak, and it kind of creates everything else. It makes Jalen Green's life easier. It makes everybody's life easier. It makes Jabari Smith Jr.'s life easier too. I don't think it's a bad bet. I think if we were to kind of look at these guys, and you've got me thinking about what if Şengün should be the guy to win MIP next year, because he was pretty close to winning it last year too.
I
Well,
know.
not and then he got hurt and whatever. But
If I'm not saying that you would be a betting man, but for anyone out there who is, I believe earlier this summer the odds of Şengün winning were 100-1. I
wow,
would just keep that in your back pocket,
wow, okay,
But we'll see. I think he unquestionably has the talent to put up the numbers to get the attention. I mean, and
yeah,
that's a big part of the journey. But it's like I'm so excited for the Rockets, and then like Dylan Brooks is going to play 30 minutes a night, and just be like, oh god. And
Hey man,
so,
hey, whoa,
hey,
whoa,
you
whoa,
look.
whoa, whoa. Where did we we didn't need the stray? Come
Are you
on.
gonna want him to play twice the minutes that Amen Thompson does? Because he's
Look,
going to.
look, it's valid. It's a valid concern. I think Dylan Brooks is a pretty good trade candidate, by the way, if he ends whatever. We'll see. The Rockets will definitely be, if like a Jimmy Butler comes on the market this year, or if I think actually Jimmy is the only guy that I think they would take a stab at of the prospective
They would,
star.
I mean, it makes
Yeah,
sense on a number of levels,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Anyways, yeah, we'll see.
yeah. Okay. So I think back to you. Anyone else that you think could be in the first time All-Star conversation before we get into sort of the deeper waters?
There's one guy that I'm like 35% kind of want to throw him in here, but maybe he will start our conversation about the rest of these guys too, because I think
Okay.
like I'm done with the
I'll, I'll
first
I'll
time
give a
All-Star.
brief shout out to Franz Wagner, who has never made an
Yep,
All-Star team. I
yep.
think to keep that very short and sweet, um, I think that the team really, for better and worse, revolves around Paolo to an extent that I don't know that Franz necessarily gets the usage to get all-star numbers.
Right.
He gets good numbers, but he's not grabbing 8 rebounds a game. He's like 4 or 5. And he's not going to be 6 assists a game. He's 4 to 5. So he would have to be averaging like 27, 28 a game. And I just don't think the usage pie is going to break down that way. So I
Yeah.
really like Franz, but I would say no to him. So
Yeah.
was he your guy or was it a different guy?
No, no, no. This is a Raptor.
Ooh,
And I
there's
again,
a couple candidates here.
there are a couple candidates here, and so I'm just curious how you're feeling about Immanuel Quickley.
Mm,
Not to become an all-star, because I think his chances of actually becoming an all-star are tough.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I don't know. There is a world, if I'm doing the Doctor Strange, how many versions of this are there? Like there is a reality where Quickly just pops off this year. And like becomes an all-star, and the three-point shooting is at a prolific rate. Like he did not shoot enough last year volume wise. I think it got to 7.5 in Toronto. I would like that to get a little bit higher. Career
Mm.
wise, he's only about 5. Um, I ultimately just am curious where you're at with a player like Quickly, who I think the counting stats will be there because the usage will be there for Toronto. And I'm not sure that will bring him an all-star candidate type of thing, because I don't think Toronto will be winning that many games, unfortunately. And it will be tough to put him in that conversation. But I think from a counting stat perspective, there is a world in which we see like, okay, this is a guy who got 5% more usage and went from he was like maybe, I think he was like 19, 7, and 5 in Toronto.
Yeah, just about. Yep.
Yeah. If he goes from 19, 7, and 5 to like 22, 7, and 5, or 23, 7, and 5, those are pretty good counting stats.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's my last guy that might be in this conversation if we really squinted our eyes.
I think he's in there. Yeah. Because of what you said about the counting stats that he can hit. I think Quickley, again, this is very broad strokes.
Yeah.
Very broad strokes, he's a brilliant player, a really smart player,
Yeah.
both off the ball and on the ball, which is another reason why he was a very good get for the Raptors and why like I feel comfortable that his numbers will be even better this year because I don't
Yeah.
think there's a context really in which he fails or doesn't help them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the biggest thing for him has been inconsistency in finding his shot inside the arc. You know,
Totally.
he upped his volume from about 5 threes a game to 7+ in Toronto, and his percentage stayed the same, which is basically right at 40%. I mean, he is a great shooter, has always been able to draw fouls, has always been a great free throw shooter, has
Yeah.
always had a good floater, but you can't really count on a floater to be your main point of attack or your main scoring option inside the arc. So
Yeah.
that's where the Raptors would have to be exceedingly clever to try to get him good and easy looks inside the arc, given the quality of their shooting talent.
Yep.
And I don't know that ultimately he will get there. But look, if he starts shooting 10 or 11 threes a game, then maybe he doesn't need to have
Right.
that sort of mini leap inside the arc. I think for guys like Quickley, that is harder to do than it seems to really get up to that elite level, because I think just um at a basic sort of biological level, being a guard with arms that long, because Quickley's arms are like 6'10", 6'11" wingspan ish.
Yeah.
It's it's just hard to get that many threes off. You know,
Yeah, he has a slower release relative
yeah.
to other guys too, which is definitely a problem.
So,
Yeah.
so that's why I would say I don't know necessarily that he'll get up to that volume from three, and I don't know that the theory is really there inside the arc, but he will take every shred of available improvement that is
Yeah.
there. Like he is that smart. He is really in like
Yeah.
95th plus percentile in terms of how he reads the game, position and positions himself on a given possession. You know,
Yeah.
he's great. So I very much look forward to him, but I agree it is sort of in the squint
Yeah.
category.
Very, very much so in the squint department. I can't even deny that myself. I agree that there is major issues with the finishing department. I'm hoping that his craft as a free throw guy and foul drawer helps alleviate some of that, because I saw that towards the end of the second half of last season. But yeah, we'll
Mm-hmm.
see. We'll see with Quick. We'll see.
Okay. So if we're looking for another, so Quickly is sort of maybe squintable on the all-star account, but he's very clearly a starter. Like he's going to, and this will be
Yeah.
his first full season starting. So I'm trying to think. I have a list of lots of players. Um, in terms of one that will start, you know, I don't know that this is a guy that I would say is going to be one of the most improved players, but I think that Jaime Jaquez deserves a little bit of attention here. He's another,
On my
this
list.
isn't
Yep.
really an MIP bet because he's a year two guy. And unless you're Victor Wembanyama, you're not going to get a ton of
Yeah.
consideration for MIP in year two. But Jaquez, I think there's a very good chance their starting lineup includes him, you know, Jimmy and Bam, obviously, Rozier. And then it could be Jaquez and Nikola Jovic. You know, they could start both those guys unless they want to trot out Tyler Hero again or Duncan Robinson again in their starting lineup. And
Yeah.
I think it would be at least refreshing if they did not do that. But Jaquez, first team all rookie last year, really, really good inside the arc score is sort of an inversion of Quickly. And the question is
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
the consistency and volume around his three, because that's never been what he has wanted to do that much. But for what it's worth, for you know, the Heat won summer league and they like played Jaquez in their first couple summer league games, which really
He did not
he
need
had no
that.
business being out there. He was the best player I saw play on a summer league court, and that includes, by the way, Brandon Miller. I thought he played
Right.
better than Brandon. when Brandon was out there. But he is interesting because I don't quite know how, with a similar sort of spacing issue, how Miami positions him to take the leap that I think he is capable of taking.
Mm-hmm.
Because he is comfortable in the post. He's comfortable as a passer. He's comfortable facing up. He's comfortable punishing mismatches. That is someone who could, in the right circumstance, be like a third starter, which is incredibly valuable. That's sort
Yeah.
of what Quickley is he is a third starter. Maybe not one of your two top running dogs, but
Yeah.
Desmond Bane is a third starter. He's on a max contract, much different player. But
Yeah.
I think Jaquez has that in him to provide enough well-roundedness and assume enough offensive usage to get there. I just don't quite know how it will happen with Jimmy and Bam. And the reality is Jimmy will miss time, and there will be lots of times where
Yep.
he's off the court, a shooter's in his place, and that allows space for Jaime to cook. But he is another brainiac, really smart guy who plays exceptionally hard. And I want to see in year two if some natural physical gain, some natural just sort of NBA man strength arrives in his game to where he gets to be closer to sort of that unguardable tier in the areas of the floor that he prefers, which is sort of that, 12 feet and in, either facing up or posting up. What do you think about Jaquez?
I like him, man. I'm a fan. I remember vividly watching a game where Jimmy didn't play against the Raptors, and Jaime just destroyed the Raptors. He took full control of the game. He was making his shots, which helped ultimately. But I think his decision making on the floor when it came to attacking closeouts, Miami, they were such a great drive and kick team a few years ago. They have went away from that a little bit, and I think he's a really great stir the drink type of guy, right? He can kind of churn the wheels of your offense when things get muddy. I'm a big fan. I'm curious to see, like you said, about where they slot him in and how much time he gets around certain guys. I would like to see him more as a handoff partner for some of these guys as well. I think he has those chops. Really, the other guy I wanted to talk about in Miami, though,
Jovic?
Nikola Jovic. Yes.
Take the
So,
floor, my man.
okay, so the man shot nearly 40% from three last year, made tangible strides as a defender. I'm very impressed with some of the shot making ability, but also believe that he could be a game changer for Miami's starters identity wise. Because if you slot him in, which they did for a few games, let me double check exactly how many games he
Hey, he
started.
started 38 games last year.
38 games, right? So
Yes.
they tried the Bam and Jovic lineups quite a bit, right? I thought there was a decent amount of success there with Jovic being a floor spacing, and he's like a larger dude. I
He's
think
big. Yeah.
he's like 6'10", but he feels bigger than 6'10" sometimes. And I'm just a fan of his archetype for a team like Miami that so desperately could use a floor stretching big man. We just talked about Jabari Smith Jr. and how important he is to kind of connecting the dots for Houston. I think Jovic could be that for Miami. Not in the same archetype, similar in terms of floor stretching bigs, but just more utility and what he can bring to their offense. Yeah, him and Hawkins are really important to them offensively, but I'm curious to see what Jovic's 3-point shooting and just overall versatility can do on that end for them.
Yeah, so the Heat obviously know that they need to get a lot of three-pointers up from somewhere, and it's not going to come from Bam, even though
Yeah.
Bam will try to shoot a little bit more. And it's not going to come from Jimmy because it never has. And
Yeah.
Rozier, that's what he's there to do, is to be a very high volume guy.
Hero,
Um,
right? Yeah.
and they have Hero and Robinson, but I just think they have sort of, I don't know. I have no intel into the Miami Heat's, culture, uh, vaunted as it is. But they like I just have to imagine that they've kind of made up their mind a little bit regarding Hero and to a lesser extent Robinson. I don't think Robinson was ever a long-term starter in their plans, but I think Hero
Yeah,
was. And I would just be dismayed if they planned on Hero starting a lot of games this coming season and think the result's going to be any different because
yeah,
I don't really think it is. That's nothing against Hero. He's clearly an NBA guy. I just for
for sure.
where the Heat want to go, I just don't know that you can start Hero. Again, Hero and Rozier. Rozier can compete on defense, but he is undersized. It's just
Yeah.
two more, and that's a small team across a lot of positions because Jimmy's not the biggest guy either, and neither's Bam. So I out of Jaquez and Jovic, Jovic is the higher volume 3-point guy. So you would think that they would want to play him. And maybe Jaquez just doesn't have the 3-point volume to start, given that they have Jimmy and Bam. But I would like to see them try to make that work and see what Spo can cook up. They also have
Yeah.
Khalil Ware, which not for nothing. He is a
Yeah.
rookie center who can shoot threes. And I also think sort of a dark horse rookie of the year candidate because I think
Yeah.
they could use that dimension, that floor spacing dimension, even though I guess their backup on paper is probably like Kevin Love. But uh with Jovic, his defensive, I think he made strides defensively to the point where he wasn't a total liability. And I think if you play hard and execute your role in a Miami Heat defense and you're 6'10, then
Mhm.
you won't be a defensive liability. It's just one of the blessings of having
Yeah,
that much
being
size.
big. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So in terms of making the sort of leap, like he started almost 40 games. He still only averaged like under 8 points a game. I think you mentioned that they were a drive and kick team and they kind of got away from that. I wonder, Jaquez is a guy who I feel comfortable can sort of hold the ball and an offensive possession pardon me, revolve around his decision making with the ball.
Mhm.
Not that they would be putting him in ISO or anything like that, but as a post or extended post up guy, a guy who can operate split cuts,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I think he can do that stuff. I wonder if they have that in mind for Jovic or if he can seize it or if he's still more of like spacing guy who's there to just put up the threes. That's sort
Yeah.
of what I'm curious about. But a very interesting team to watch.
Yeah, they have a lot of questions, obviously, and they could stand to benefit if one of these guys pops in a major way, because it solves a lot of the questions that they have about are we just kicking this can down the road with Bam and Jimmy, and is this team truly going to break through at some point and get to that next level? And obviously they've had their finals runs, but if a guy like Jaquez or Jovic pops in a major way, I could see Jaquez being that third starter. It's tough to see it with Jimmy and Bam there though. And so
It
yeah,
is.
I'm curious. Maybe it happens. Maybe it does and that like changes our answer about the Miami Heat and what they can do this season. But yeah, they're definitely two guys you got to watch for sure.
So in terms of I mentioned him in talking about Jaquez. Someone who is clearly a starter is going to be Brandon Miller, and
Yeah.
someone who I think is already going to be a top two offensive option on his team, if not the number one option, or maybe the preferred number one option, whether or not it shakes out that way. So, do you think that he has enough to like make sort of an all-star-ish kind of run this year? Do you think it's that
Ooh.
smooth an improvement for him as a year two guy, or is this a growth is not linear situation
It's a good
as
question.
LaMelo comes back on the fold?
Well, it also depends on if LaMelo takes some of those touches away from Brandon Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And so where does that usage go and how much does he take? And ultimately like second half of the season for Charlotte, Brandon Miller from a shot creation perspective, even from a defensive perspective, he just looked like a two-way beast, like he was going to be an all-star at some point. Um, how that looks with LaMelo back into the fold, likely, hopefully, fully healthy, and also how good Charlotte is. if they're winning games and if Charles Lee is getting these guys to play defense and Mark Williams is healthy and he's able to be this rim protector around the basket, I think that helps with some of the question marks around this team defensively. If they're winning games and they're like in the play-in race, I could see Brandon Miller being an all-star, especially if he's the guy who's leading them there usage-wise and touches-wise and points per game-wise. And there's a world where that happens, but I'm sort of skeptical if there will be that growth is not linear thing where, especially with LaMelo coming back into the fold, they have to sort of rewire themselves to give the ball back to LaMelo and find more off-ball ways for Brandon Miller to succeed. Not saying he can't. I actually think he could be a really great off-ball player, but still take some time to get that, right?
Yeah, I agree that there's going to be an adjustment period as those two learn to play together because I don't know. I really don't know when LaMelo's. I don't want to be disrespectful, but like I don't know in LaMelo's history as a player, as a professional. I'll just say as a professional player, which goes back I think to Lithuania and then to
Yeah.
Australia and then to Charlotte. If he has ever played well alongside a high volume guy. He
Mm-hmm.
played off the ball a little bit in Charlotte where they had, Rozier and like Gordon Hayward and
Yeah.
everything. But that isn't the same as trying to establish chemistry with a real running mate. And I don't know that that's really I don't know if he's ever really had that challenge. He could it could work out really well because I think Brandon's off-ball talent as a mover and a shooter at his size is pretty insane. I mean,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
talked about wingspans and sort of the slowness of Quickley's release. For his size, Brandon's release is really good. Really good. Like probably you can count on one hand the number of wings who
Yeah.
shoot as quick and diverse a ball as Brandon does. So I could see it in that respect if they are creative enough in using him. LaMelo can play off the ball, but someone needs to be operating those pick and rolls. I kind of think it's a little soon for Brandon to be doing that much, but look, Charlotte is an odd team. They're another
Yeah.
team with a new regime, new coach. Um, I don't know that they're necessarily gunning for the play-in or the playoffs,
Yeah.
especially if they plan on playing their rookie, Tijana Salon, a lot. Um, but they can, if they stay healthy, they can make a little bit of noise. I mean, they have a real offense, especially throughout their starting five. And if Mark Williams is healthy as a lob threat
Yeah.
with LaMelo, that's like the spine of something that is very hard to guard and to stop.
Yeah.
So Charlotte is a team that I think could pop and surprise people, and Miller could be the face of something like that. It's another sort of, I think, under the radar kind of signature question is how well he and LaMelo click and right away. Because if they
Yeah.
do, then they've got their future.
Yeah.
Not that they can't add to it, but if those two work together, they can really, really work together.
Yeah.
So I don't have much of an opinion on it, but I think it merits the mention.
Yeah. I mean, I also think Brandon Miller's a really smart player off the ball. If the three isn't falling, he's so good at the back cuts, and if someone's going to top lock him, he's cutting back door to get the and like that pairs really well with LaMelo and his quick twitch kind of playmaking stuff. So there is a world where that does mesh incredibly well, and the two guys are just in sync. But again, it is something to watch. Okay, I have another guy who I think has now graduated to being on a starter on another sort of middle of pack Eastern Conference team. Graduated to being a starter just because of a trade. And I'm curious to see how you feel about this player, or even if you feel this player starts. I think he does. And this is
Okay.
Dyson Daniels for the
Oh my
Atlanta
goodness.
Hawks.
Go ahead.
So I don't
Sorry.
I don't
Like I
I don't
feel
have
myself blushing. Go ahead.
I don't have like a big a horse in this race, so to speak, okay? But
Okay.
ultimately I think there's a world, and if we're going back to like realities of something happening in a certain way, Dyson Daniels is a very unique type of player to play alongside Trae Young.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they can use him as a screener. They can use him as this short roll guy who can make plays in the middle of the floor. I think defensively, it sort of speaks for itself. You know, he speaks for himself what he can contribute on the defensive end, especially at the point of attack. But he has the size that can be sort of like this weak side rim protector type as well if
Mm-hmm.
he's stationed lower on the floor. There's a world where he breaks out, right? I don't know if the offense and the 3-point shooting and that stuff gets to the point where we have a legitimate conversation about him,
Mm-hmm.
but I am intrigued. I do think he's going to be a starter. And I think the Hawks look at him as like, okay, well, this is a guy who can pair really well in the backcourt with Trae Young. What say
All right.
you? How do you feel?
So first of all, with you convinced that he's going to be a starter, I imagine then you believe the starting five to be a center. Let's call it Capella, but if they trade Capella, then
Sure. Yeah.
Okongwu.
Yeah.
A center, number one, Trey, number two, Jalen Johnson, number three, DeAndre Hunter, and Dyson. That's what you and
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
Bogdanovich off the bench again. Bring
Yeah.
they stick with Bogdanovich coming off the bench.
I mean, I'm for Bogdanovich starting over Hunter if you want to, but yes, one of those floor spacers on the floor.
And do they have Sadiq Bey? Is he on that team rehabbing?
He's on Washington now. Yeah.
Washington. He is? Oh God.
I know.
Man, I gotta
I
brush
know.
up.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's no, but it's one of those moves that you're like, okay, I guess Sadiq Bey is on Washington. You know, it's not a
Okay. Okay.
not it's not shaking up the league. You're good. Don't worry.
Uh all right. So I mentioned to you when we started, before we started recording, that one of my summer projects is looking at role player guards,
Ah,
switchblades. That was your little you teased that
I did. Yep.
somewhere between an hour and 4 hours ago when we started recording. Um, Dyson is one of those guys. When I say switchblade, and hopefully I write about this group, it's a guard who has guard skills, but notably is a very versatile defensive piece. Derek White, Drew Holiday, Jalen Suggs, Herb Jones. Like this is a player that is very much in vogue among very good teams, which is
Yeah.
probably why Atlanta targeted Dyson, because Dyson was on a team that had Herb Jones and he couldn't seem to get the minutes even in their playoff series because of these offensive shortcomings. But Atlanta sort of wants to take a bet on him in figuring that out, especially next to a more, I guess, polished offensive engine in Trey than Zion is in New
Totally.
Orleans. Trey also is going to miss less time than Zion.
Yep.
So I will say about Dyson, it isn't overly complicated what has held him back. And I think he is one guy where if I were planning his career from the get-go, he's one who I wish maybe should have gone to college and played a couple years in the NCAA to really get these reps up. I
Mhm.
mean, his problem is not only that he passes up threes, which he does, but it's that as a point guard prospect, his decisions were not bad, but they were very much textbook. They were somewhat mechanical. It
Right.
was very much if this, then that. Not really improvisational at all. And when he got into the NBA, if you go to college and that's how you play, you can learn some improvisation and learn how you're going to approach different things the more teams game plan for you and all this stuff. But if you enter the NBA as a role player, the way that Dyson did, you really don't get to exercise your improvisation. You have to
Yeah.
fill a role. And that means it's sort of less jazz and more just sort of beat the drum and do what is asked of you and do it on time and do it appropriately. And for someone whose shot was the question and shot volume was the question, it's not hard to figure out why he got lost in the shuffle. In Atlanta, I don't know. I think I am probably on the more skeptical side
Same.
of the ledger.
Yeah.
Number one, because I don't know that Jalen Johnson's shooting leap is happening this year. And so you'd be starting potentially 3 below average shooters in Jalen, a center, and Dyson Daniels.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Number two, I don't know that Dyson is going to be encouraged to exercise any of this improvisation playing alongside Trey, who's as high a usage a guy as there is in the league. We just saw what a 2-point guard experiment looked like in Atlanta, and it wasn't great with DeJounte. And three, for what it's worth, I know this player is a lot younger than him, but they did just have the number 1 pick and took a perimeter player who is a shooter who will get him up. And so he'll have to contend with minutes with Zachary Risachet. Now, as a defensive piece, talking about how I looked at all these different role player guards, Dyson is right up there, right up near the top. Like, probably, I think he is probably a better defensive talent than Jalen Suggs, who just made all defensive team. So, like, he's that good. It's just a matter of whether or not he can play enough to make that worth it. I would like to see him take a page out of Drew Holiday and Derek White's book and show some willingness to post smaller guards up. I think that is something that could benefit Dyson greatly and take all of the focus away from his shot volume. Because it's very hard. One of the hardest things in the NBA to do is to go from being a low volume 3-point shooter to a high volume 3-point shooter, especially as a guard. It's so hard to do and like rarer than you think. But Dyson has like the strength, the shoulder width, the length to be able to punish guys on the block if he wants to add that to his game. That's kind of what I think he needs to do. And I think there's a little too much working against him this year, but I think there's a world where he does become this very, very valuable player. I just don't think we would see it right away this year. That's my thought.
I wonder if they just like, I would like him to learn from, and it's crazy to say this, like play into what role Amen Thompson played for the Rockets at the second half of the year, which was just like, be this versatile defender, but also a guy who's just kind of like doing a little bit of everything on the offensive end to just make it to the point where you can be a valuable offensive player or a neutral offensive player. You know what I mean? And for what it's worth, I think that improvisational stuff that you mentioned about Dyson completely applies to Amen. Like he has that improvisation. He has that kind of like
he does.
reactionary passing stuff that is incredible to watch. And that's probably the difference maker between Amen becoming a non-shooter who can succeed on the floor in the NBA versus Dyson becoming that guy. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah, I also think on that team, though, I think they will use Jalen Johnson more for that role than Dyson. And this is the thing, like Jalen isn't necessarily quite as twitchy a defender as Dyson is, but he's very good and he's bigger. And that helps cover up for a lot. So that's sort of my thought there. A very good candidate who I like. I would love for Dyson to be good enough to play 30 minutes a night in the NBA because he's so cool. I mean, that defensive talent can really shine, but
it's tough.
Need to get there. there. Okay, so we're going to pivot a little bit and I'm just going to start naming dudes. Like I'm going to rapid fire because there's lots of guys to get to.
I know. Yeah. We have a lot of guys.
And I want to see how many overlap with sort of the list that you have. So there's many guys who could, and this will be a mix between sort of second year and third year and then fourth year and older guys. But some of the guys that I had, we won't belabor it, but a similar sort of switchblade guy is like Josh Green, who I think is going to start on the Hornets. I think he, again, won't get the offensive usage necessarily, but has that skill set, and his 3-point volume subtly has started ticking up in Dallas towards the end. So I think he could be someone who pops a little bit on the role player level. But some other players, and you let me know who you want to talk about. So you've got the open starting spot in Denver, Christian, Braun, Julian, Strawther. You've got, let's see, A guy we talked about at the episode last time, Vince Williams Jr. in Memphis, who I love to death. Another
Yep.
switchbladey kind of guy. You
Very
also
fun
have,
player. Yeah.
with Gigi Jackson being out, I think Jake LaRavia is sort of a deeper sleeper guy who could pop a little bit as someone who's gotten his 3-point volume up. But you've got
If while we're on the Grizzlies, Scottie Pippen Jr. also potential chance. He cooked in summer league.
I
They
know,
need a
man,
backup
he's
point
really
guard.
good.
Maybe there's a chance. Maybe there's a world.
Tumani Kamara, Shaedon Sharpe, Scoot potentially in Portland,
Yep.
Bilal Coulibaly in
Hmm.
Washington, Jarace Walker in Indiana, Taylor Hendricks in Utah. You loved, I mean, Kobe, I think was maybe your most improved pick last year. I think Ayo Dosunmu alongside him. We
Yep.
can talk about Giddey getting the volume in Chicago because he's going to
Yep.
get the volume. Um, Case and Wallace in Oklahoma City. You know, they're
On the
stacked and
list.
added Caruso, but
Yep.
Kaysen's quite good. Uh, Out of that crew, what sort of did you have any overlaps on your list from?
Ton, yeah, a ton. Yeah, there's a lot. I'll just name a few guys you didn't mention that are on here that I don't have. Noah Clowney, Brooklyn Nets,
Ooh,
interested in what he might do. Was
okay.
pretty intriguing last year next to Nick Claxton. Precious Achua, just I'm holding on. I'm holding on to stock. I'm a big Precious Achua guy. And so I'm holding on to that stock, especially with all the injuries piling up
That's
for New
right.
York.
That's right.
Okay, who else do I have? RJ Barrett for a second year in a row. We'll see if that materializes into anything. Obviously had a really great second half with Toronto. Let's see. You mentioned the Nuggets guys. Oh, Trey Mann, Hornets guard. How do you feel?
If
Interesting
we are
player.
talking about 2021 class guards that have bounced around a little bit,
Yeah.
I actually prefer someone getting a shot on the Nets in Keon Johnson. I would prefer him to
Ooh.
Trey Mann.
Okay. All right.
Probably doesn't have as much of a
The
defined
offensive.
role as Trey does going
Yeah,
into
yeah.
the season because Trey's probably expected to be a bench guy. Though I don't know that Trey is necessarily above Vasilije Micic on that Hornets
Also
bench
fair. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hierarchy. But I like Keon. Keon is just more of that switchbladey type to
He
me
is.
than
He is.
Trey.
Yeah.
But what do you think? What do you think
I
about
I just think he is a pretty intriguing scorer.
He
And
is.
so like the pop of a guy who can give you like just randomly 20 off the bench on a given night. I think that draws in the viewer a little bit more to be like, what is going on? Why is Trey Man, when NBA Central will post Trey Man's last 10 games, 20, 20, 20, and you're like, what? Wait, I gotta watch the Hornets. And so I think there's a world where like Trey Man pops as like this bench guy for the Hornets who can just kind of be this spark plug off the bench. Um,
The
Moses Moody,
crossover's filthy, man.
yeah, yeah.
He can cross
Oh
you
yeah,
up and he can
that
shoot.
shin angle flexibility, man.
That's right.
The
That's right.
sickos know about it. You talked about Shaedon Sharpe. I agree. Maybe we can touch on him a little bit more. But Moses Moody, Keegan Murray,
Ooh.
Keon Ellis, and
Ooh.
the final two, Santi Aldama in Memphis, I think could
Ooh.
potentially lean in. You mentioned Jake LaRavia. I think the other side of that coin is like maybe Santi gets a
Probably.
little uptick in usage. And then Trey Murphy, which I think I want to start. I want him to start. I need him to start in New Orleans. And if it doesn't happen this year, I might just give up in general on
Oh, you don't have to give up because if it doesn't happen and they don't extend him, I'm sure Toronto, your Raptors can give him
yeah.
a max and sign him an RFA. And then
I will have no problem with that. Yeah, send whatever's. He's like one of the most. Look, I know he had injuries to start last year, but he really is like one of the most underutilized, very awesome players in the league. Can attack a closeout with the best of them. Very athletic player who shoots the lights out. And I am frustrated about his role in New Orleans because he gets, CJ McCollum gets prioritized over. And CJ is a pretty good player, very, very good player, important
yeah,
for New Orleans
and
last
CJ
year.
was really good last year. He
He was,
was.
he was, he was. But I would like them to realize what they have in Trey Murphy and lean into that more. And
Yeah.
also Herb too, but that's another story. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's kind of an open secret that New Orleans kind of wants to move on from Brandon Ingram and they want
Absolutely.
to start Trey
Yeah.
for lots of sort of pretty clear fit reasons, Trey spacing for Zion and all of that. For
Yeah.
what it's worth, with Zion missing, a good amount of games last year, the numbers with Ingram and Trey sharing the floor were excellent, like really good.
Yeah.
CJ, Ingram, and Trey, I want to say were like plus 10 or 11 per 100 possessions. I mean, they were
Nice.
really good
Yeah.
with them on in Zion's absence. The the issue is that if they are going to try to figure that out, I just don't know with the new salary rules and everything how it's harder to make trades with these aprons
Yeah.
to find a home for Ingram. Like there's a couple that kind of work. I think sort of Ingram, DeAndre Ayton kind of works,
Sure.
sort of makes sense. I think you could find a couple other teams where if they wanted to take them on, they could, but lots of other teams maybe just want to tank and don't want to do it. And it
Yeah.
just makes it hard. I mean, I think Trey is an improving defender. I think he had some good moments in that playoff series against both Jalen Williams and Shea because Trey's so long. And
Yeah.
I think he's tracking to be a better defender than Brandon Ingram was. Um, but it's just how do you figure those minutes out? Like if I'm trying to figure out who to play around Zion, because that's how what you really want your lineup to be. It's like let's figure out the best guys to play around Zion. I just don't think Brandon Ingram's one of those guys.
Yeah.
I think you want Trey because of the shooting. You want Herb because of his switchbladiness, and he's a good shooter in his own right now. Um, I kind of want CJ because CJ can run a pick and roll and is a good movement and relocation shooter.
Yeah.
And that would mean that your other guy's got to be DeJounte Murray. You're not bringing DeJounte off the bench if you're just
No.
trading for him.
Nope.
So, but that would put Zion at center, and that would be really weird.
Yeah.
And but and I know they've talked about starting Daniel Tice. They can try to bring Trey off the bench again if they want, but I just don't think Tice, Zion, Ingram, I just don't think that lineup has juice. I
Yeah.
just don't. Especially because it's not like DeJounte's the greatest shooter in the world either.
No.
Like
No.
it just if you're talking about potentially bringing both McCollum and Trey Murphy off the bench if you're starting a traditional center, like then you really have just cut your nose off to spite your face.
Two
I just
players
don't think
who two players who also fit Zion way more than
that's what I'm saying.
the two
Yeah.
starters that you have.
So
Yeah.
I think that another sort of trend in the league is that the player who has sort of been able to cook on offense but not quite be defensively versatile to start, those have traditionally been guards and in large part still are guards. That's sort of your traditional sixth man.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, the Trey Man thing I just talked about. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, I think we are reaching a point where wings will start to occupy that role if the wing is bad enough on defense. I'm
Mm.
not saying Ingram is like Ingram's problem is more about his lack of fit with Zion than it is really a comment on his defense. But he is someone who I
Totally.
think
Yeah.
kind of makes a lot of sense as a sixth man if the fit with the running mate isn't good enough. Like his decision making is a little too slow. He likes to operate inside the arc a little too much. And so
Yep.
I kind of think that's what his destiny might be for his next team, unless he wants to go to Detroit and be that running mate for Cade Cunningham or something. And I don't know that.
Which also is not a great fit. Ultimately is also. Yeah, you're right, man. It's Ingram spots are a really, really tough find in the league right now, especially with just all the teams that you would be like, okay, maybe are teams that are likely looking for a lottery pick next year. Um,
Yeah.
and that's where I don't know if there's a team that would like to have Brandon Ingram on their squad. It's weird because he's in this the NBA is in this transition phase, but also he's in a transition phase in his career, and I think his archetype is a bit of a transition phase in their cycle. Um, yeah,
It's
I'm
weird though, like
yeah.
the, it's like with him and Levine too.
Yeah,
These like talented offensive players who have some size, but the fit issues or the defensive questions for one reason or another are there.
yeah.
Some team can acquire them for cheap. Like some team can. Could the Los Angeles
Like
Clippers offer
yeah,
Terrence Mann and whatever? They have a couple contracts in that size and just get Brandon Ingram, who I believe is an LA guy. Maybe I'm off on that, but he's played in LA before. And
yeah,
like just like get him to help take over when Kawhi is hurt and everything. Like maybe,
yeah.
probably not the worst idea in the world. It's a weird league. Fit is just becoming increasingly important. But to answer your question about Trey Murphy, I literally didn't list him because I've been screaming for years from this chair about how Trey Murphy is the truth and people need
Yeah,
to
man.
respect him.
Yeah.
I had I remember a DM conversation I had, I won't say with who, before last year, where you just mentioned Keegan Murray and they were like, yeah, comparing Keegan Murray and Trey is interesting. And Keegan was coming off of that playoff series against the Warriors where he
Yeah.
popped a little bit.
Yeah.
Uh, and they're like, and Keegan's better than Trey. And I was like, get out of here. I was just furious. And I like Keegan. I don't know that the usage is going to be there for him either. He will start, but
Yeah,
DeRozan and Fox and Sabonis will soak up a lot. And I don't
Monk
know that.
too. Monk will
Right.
cannibalize a lot of the stuff that they're doing too.
Right.
So,
So yeah.
yeah, I do think this whole conversation about most improved is a lot about where the opportunity is coming from,
Of course.
plus okay, how are they prepared to deal with that opportunity? And I don't know. I think it's a pretty open year for the most improved conversation. I know people will gravitate towards Wemby, but if we were to eliminate Wemby from the conversation, it's very open. I have no idea who most improved will be.
So, if there's I guess we should mention a little bit that Braun Strawther thing because that's an interesting team building deal because that's on a
Yeah,
contender,
yeah,
number one, and it's a difference. They are different archetypes. Brown is more of that switchbladey type, more of a defensive reputation coming into the league. He had to get his 3-point volume up.
yeah.
Good
Still does.
passer, good
Still
cutter.
does.
Yep.
Yep.
But a good player who has been a rotation player basically from the jump. And Strawther, who is more of the movement shooter, high volume guy who has a little bit of size and looked pretty good in summer league, operating more as a guard, like as a distributor. So, which which do you think they should go with? I'm curious. This is like a good NBA nerd test about who you'd like to see playing off of Jokic more, Brown or Strawther.
I think that's tough. It is tough because they are very different players. Um, and with Brown, I think there's a world in which the 3 point volume does not get to the point where it works. But also, I think the Nuggets are uniquely built to compensate for that with an uptick in Michael Porter Jr. shooting more, in
Mhm.
Jamal Murray shooting more, and hopefully Nikola Jokic regaining his 3 point shooting powers because it has been kind of shaky over the last couple of years as well, a little streaky. That is like the most I would be able to say about the best player in the world right now. By the way, I'm not complaining about that, but ultimately, him increasing his volume and percentage would be nice. And so I'm, I think there is a world where Brown works and can be this kind of cutter slash guard screener slash shooter, maybe in the corners, and it works. But I think long term, I'm more intrigued by Strawther, and the reason I say
Hmm.
that is because of the offensive ability, because I can see pretty seamlessly how him and Jokic could work off of handoffs, and how Strawther can kind of be this screener that pops up kind of flares out and knocks down a three on any given possession. And I think that
Sure.
is unique to what the Nuggets might need offensively more than what Braun brings defensively. Does that apply to this season? Maybe not. I think it'll take a little bit longer for Strawther to be tenable defensively. And that's the question that I have moving forward. But yeah, where do you sit on that?
It's a very interesting question. I think for this season, I will say Braun. Both because to me, I don't think his 3-point volume is so much a physical limitation or even sort of a touch limitation or a confidence limitation. It's more just like he hasn't really been forced to do it yet. But I actually think he has a little bit more shooting talent than meets the eye. That's just sort of a hunch on my part.
Sure.
But we'll see if it bears out. But also, number one, lingering questions about Jamal Murray and his durability and his health. So I would probably want the better defensive player back there with him to
Yeah.
make sure that you're trying to save him some reps on that end a little bit. Number two, unfortunately, is that they have Russell Westbrook on their team. And so I think Strawther needs to be on the floor a lot with Russ if Russ is going to play. That's where
Yeah.
his shooting dimension is probably going to be more of a salve than in the starting lineup, which has a lot of offensive talent, baked into the cake. So if Braun and Russ are sharing the floor a lot, then all of a sudden they might have like trouble scoring, even if Jovic is on the floor. And
Yeah.
so I think Braun is probably a better fit with the starters. Long term, I don't know. I was a Strawther skeptic going into the draft because I was skeptical of his ultimate perimeter athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know what that's going to look like. It was his
Yeah.
first, I guess last year was technically his first year, second year?
Yeah.
I don't
No,
even
that's
remember.
first year. First year. But it was also like he barely played. Like he really did not get a lot of run. I know he did in the middle of the season. He got some run when they were laboring a little bit, but
Yeah, it's just these degrees of NBA athleticism. How much more athletic is your guy Grady Dick than Julian Strawther? In my opinion, he is like
fairly, considerably, I think.
correct.
Yeah.
How much
And
more
taller, I would say also,
he
right?
is.
Yeah, much taller. Yeah.
Would you say Julian Strawther is more athletic than Grayson Allen? Would you say he's more athletic than Luke Kennard? It's
Yeah, yeah. I get what
these
you're
are
saying.
sort of the margin questions, which I don't really know. Brown is just a bit more of a known quantity athletically for me, so I would go with him. But it's
If Brown can be I mean, Grayson Allen is an incredible shooter, right?
he is
Turned himself into
underrated athlete too. Ultimately,
Yes, yes,
not a
underrated
great
athlete.
one, but a little underrated.
Yeah, totally. I don't think Christian Brown can get to Grayson Allen levels of shooting, but if he can get
No, no.
50% there, can we get 25% there? Can we get that changes the equation for Denver though. Like if he
Yeah.
can I mean swap out Christian Brown with Grayson Allen, I think a lot of the questions about Denver is different, and maybe change. By the way, um, you mentioned Grady Dick. He's on the list. I forgot to mention him, so just wanted to throw it out there.
Grady's good.
Yeah,
I mean, he's good.
yeah,
He's a guy they're going to need him to shoot a bunch of threes. So I don't know that he's going to do a lot more than shoot threes because they
yeah,
need that volume to come from somewhere. But he
yeah.
can play. Um, a couple deeper guys. I just want to mention them before I forget them, including on a really good team. Both of these teams could be good, but one is like a real deal contender. I want to shout out my guy Ricky Council the fourth on the
Mm.
Philadelphia
I
76ers.
thought about I thought about putting him on there. I just figured, man, maybe this would be too deep of a cut if I put Ricky Ricky on there. But
No,
okay, go ahead.
this is the place to shout Ricky out.
Give me the
Unless you're
give me the
on
pitch.
whatever, unless you're on, ball with Trill.
Yeah.
Um Ricky is first of all I believe he got his guaranteed deal, his multi-year guaranteed deal last year, so he's in the rotation. Uh Carved out rotation minutes last year. His deal is that he is a legit, like no question, an upper level NBA athlete driving and finishing at the hoop.
Yeah.
If you
Oh, yeah.
if you watch his highlights, it's a lot of crazy drives and very powerful like dunk finishes for a 6'4" guard. He is really legit. The reason why he wasn't a first round draft pick had to do with his 3-point shot and volume, but he's always been a good free throw shooter and a high volume free throw shooter. So it's just a matter of whether or not that shot could come along. And I think that this year, I mean, it's only his second year in the league, but I
Yeah.
think this year you could see a meaningful uptick in that volume. And he could be someone who really comes out of nowhere and you're wondering why he's closing some games, maybe if
Right.
whatever, Caleb Martin's out or Oubre doesn't have it or whatever. And it's because I think he can hang on defense because of his athleticism and because he is a real deal offensive talent, like a no joke offensive talent that is going to get all the looks that he wants if he's playing off of Paul George and Maxey and Embiid. Like he won't get all the shots he wants. They'll just be open. He'll have the ability to convert. So I would say him and the other guy who it's another 3-point volume guy. Will it get there? But on the Los Angeles Clippers, I would just mention Jordan Miller, who is one of the best players in summer league and
Totally. Yeah.
has been an awesome player for years when he was at Miami in the ACC. Elite touch for a guard, has the length to defend. He's got a 6'11" wingspan. His three goes in when he shoots it. He just hasn't shot it very often, but that is an NBA rotation player waiting to happen and one that can help a good team.
I like
So
it.
I would
These are
mention him
these are
as
the
well.
fringe guys that will turn into rotation players, and then NBA Central will post them and not tag you, Chuck. They won't tag you in.
I really don't care. Best of luck to NBA Central. I mean NBA Centel, those are two different
Centel.
things, right?
They are different things. Yeah.
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 I got to keep up. Got to keep up.
It's all good.
Um, anyone else that you want to hit?
I I don't think so. I think we've talked. I think we like the only the only one I could kind of I want to talk about is Shaedon Sharpe. Um
Okay. We can talk
the
about Shaedon. Can we talk about him and Jarace Walker?
Sure.
He's the
Yeah.
he's the one. He's the one that I kind of still have in my head. Talk
Yeah.
about Shaedon. Talk to me about
Okay.
Shaedon.
So Shaedon he showed he's an incredible off-ball player. Like very very good at understanding contextually where he is on the floor and then cutting to the basket, these dives to the basket. He's an incredible athlete, right? Very good shooter. Has worked on the on-ball stuff, has been given more opportunity to do so, although had a pretty injured season last year too. Um, and I'm just curious to see how he fits in the ecosystem in Portland, given they want to give touches to Scoot Henderson and have him develop. And I'm very intrigued to see what happens with year two Scoot, given Anthony Simons is still on the team, and how tenable those three are on the court together is a major question I have. They obviously have guys like Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton who will take up usage. And so, like, how does Sharp fit into that picture? Does he get relegated into Matherin territory where like he's just like a 6-man coming off the bench type where it's like, hey, just go out there and get us buckets and be the guy you can be off the bench? Or does he carve himself out as like a guy or maybe even the guy on Portland? Just questions about Shaedon Sharpe and what he looks like. Because on any given night, you could convince me he looks like a future All-Star. And then on another night, I would be like, well, maybe he could be a good 6-man off of the bench type.
Yeah, the Matherin comp is, I think, an instructive one. A notable difference between Shaedon and Matherin is also that Matherin is playing in a very good infrastructure for offense. It's
Yeah.
like the reason Matherin isn't starting is that this team's too good,
Yeah.
and they are like a well-oiled machine. And
He's also
Carlisle,
shorter. I think Matherin is quite a bit shorter. Like there's like 6'6" versus 6'3" or 6'4".
no, he's taller than 6'3".
Okay.
Matherin is kind of like 6'5" in shoes. Shaden's probably 6'6" in shoes, but
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, Mathurin's a good athlete at the rim, like a good, strong athlete at the rim, and Shaedon's like Vince Cartery at the
Yes.
rim.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Carlisle in Indiana has always preferred as many ball handlers as possible, and that's sort of been that was Mathurin's drawback in question as a prospect. He just as a decision maker and just his handle was not super advanced. And so that's one of the reasons he doesn't play. But Shaedon is not in a good offensive system.
Yeah.
That like it's not that like he starts, but there's also a log jam even at his position, even on that team,
Yeah.
with Simons and Scoot. So I have been a Shaedon skeptic since he came in. Not that I like ranked him 25th in his class or whatever. I think I had him like 12th.
Yep.
But he my concern was a lot of this kind of thing, which is whether or not he would actually operate the ball in the NBA or if his team would try to pigeonhole him as an off-ball player. A
Right.
sort of derisive term I kind of had for him is like blue chip book night. I don't have a lot of James Booknight conversations nowadays, but Shaedon's a much better, prospect and player
Yeah.
than Booknight.
Yeah.
But in terms of Book Knight is someone who like marketed himself as an off-ball player. He's like, oh, look what all this stuff I can do off the ball at Connecticut. And then
Yeah.
you realize like skinny 6'5" off-ball players really aren't that valuable in the NBA unless you're one of the best shooters in the world. Shaedon has the athleticism to give himself a little bit more of a margin for error, but if he wants to make this leap, he needs the ball. And
Yeah.
he needs to like run pick and roll. And he has shown flashes of that in like April's past when
Yep.
like the runways open. They also like have lost a lot of those games by a lot when he
Yep.
has that usage. And it's another sort of lesson in differing development paths. He entered as a one and done, and he didn't even play the year before he entered the league. He was at Kentucky and he sat and didn't
Yep.
play.
Yep.
Uh, and so this is his going to be his third year playing, high level basketball basically, and he's in the NBA. You contrast that with another guy who started off as an off-ball player, spent 4 years in college, was a point guard by the end of it, went 30th in the draft, and that's Desmond Bane. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think most people would say that Bane's a better shooter than Sharpe. Sharpe has a lot of shooting talent,
Yeah.
but Bane was a much more complete player when he entered the NBA, and so he was able to lock down those minutes, stay on the court, and the rest of his game could mushroom off of that.
Yeah. The
With
pathway to
Shaedon,
success. Yeah.
yeah,
Totally.
I just don't know that he will get the chances to build in the right way to where he's an asset like that at that level. To me, I'm still very worried that, first of all, I would think their top priority is Scoot. Even if
Yeah.
Scoot isn't starting, like, I still think they're probably highest on Scoot. And Scoot needs the ball, and like they need to take care of Scoot and make sure that everything is good around Scoot. But that just means a
Yeah.
lot fewer chances for Shaedon. Sometimes the talent can rise above all of this, and
Yeah.
like I feel then I'd feel silly for having doubts. But increasingly in the NBA, it's fit just matters a lot, and how talents mesh and how they complement one another. And in order to really complement another good player, you have to be really good at what you do, and you have to know what you are.
Yeah.
And that's my question with Shaedon. I don't know that he knows what he is. And I don't know that he and the Blazers align on what he is and what he should be. That's why infrastructure is important. Like, I love what Portland did in getting Klingon and Avdia, because
Mm-hmm.
those are guys who know what they are and are committed to the right stuff and can set an example. And, these young guys will follow suit. The leap I would like to see from Shaedon this year is probably defensive, because
Totally.
he has the athletic tools to be a good defender. And there's not really fit questions about defense. Either you are putting in the work or you're not. So if I
Yeah.
see that from him first, then I'll have more optimism about his offensive game. But I'm still a bit skeptical for now.
The Blazers are maybe the most confusing team in the league to me.
Hmm.
I like you look at that roster and you're like, man, this could be a really fun roster. And there's log jams everywhere developmentally. And so I'm just curious to see how that all looks ultimately. I'm more, it's different. It's a different language that I'm using with them in Houston, where it's like, oh, this is different good, and this is different bad.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, I guess, in how
I
Portland will look.
I do not have the most faith in Chauncey Billups to sort all that out. I
No, I do not.
also
No.
with Aiton there, and Aiton, I don't know. Aiton gets beat up on a lot. Some of it's deserved, but I don't know. Aiton and Jeremy Grant as like a front court tandem that both really like the ball and like getting their numbers and everything. I just don't know. I
Yeah.
just want both those guys elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then we can start to talk about the Blazers in earnest. But
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
you know,
Talk to me
uh,
about Jarace Walker, man. Talk to me.
yeah. In short, he is the wing player that I think they need, or at least the version of him that they hope they were drafting is the wing player that they need. I think we were talking before we recorded about Andrew Nemhard and how
Mhm.
I think that Nemhard got paid. That's great. Fan favorite. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think he and Halliburton are too small a backcourt to actually take the Pacers where they want to go. So I think he is suited to be a really good sixth man and a useful player. But I think the Pacers need more positional size if they want to actually get there. And I think Jarace is that person. He was getting his threes up in summer league a lot. Pretty good results, but that's what he was really working on, his 3-point volume there. He is a very good passer, high feel player, very instinctual defender on his timing. He's not a crazy athlete, even though he looks strong as, a brick house.
Yeah.
He's sort of like He's kind of like if Isaiah Stewart were like a real wing, like a true blue wing. Just lots
Right.
of natural strength, not the quickest feet, great attitude, but a bit more feel, a bit more guard-ish.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just think that they can be fine without him. They can win 45 to 50 games without him. But I trust Carlisle enough to know to be like, look, we drafted this guy eighth, and we want to be able to match up with wings defensively.
Yeah.
Neesmith is a good competitive guy. I just think it's better if they shift him down to the two. There's a high offensive burden on anyone in that lineup because that offense is a well-oiled machine, and you don't want to be the fly in the ointment. But if if Jarace's shooting and his touch is there, then he could be as meaningful an improvement as anyone, not named Wemby in the NBA in terms of actually shifting the balance of power. I tend to like Indiana more than Orlando, and I think I probably like them more than Cleveland. I think that's a bit of a tougher call. But in terms of those kinds of teams in the East that get lumped
Yeah.
together a lot, I like Indiana's infrastructure more because I like their offense more and I like the way that they're built more. They just need to get a little bit bigger down the line. And I think that he can be a turnkey into doing that.
I like it. I mean, we'll see if I think I need to see some of the you said it, the offensive stuff. I mean, like if there's gonna be not high volume, but just being able to knock down your threes, it'll create a level of space. They play so fast that some of that athleticism will, hold up. It'll look good in that fast paced offense. I guess we'll see. I'm intrigued by Jarace Walker, but ultimately I'm more curious about where he fits in for this because I could see long term him making a lot of sense on this team, but this specific season, I'm curious if he's just kind of like a bench
Could
utility
be.
knife
They
type of
may
guy
just
versus
rather play like Obi
yeah,
Toppin and make sure they're playing as fast as possible and
yeah,
everything. But
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
We'll
Keep an
see.
eye on Jarris. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see.
All right. S, my man. We we have been at it here.
We have been
Um,
we've cooked a little bit. You're
we could name more guys. You and I are great at naming guys, but
right.
this was great. Thank you so much. What did we
Of
have
course, dude.
another season in front of us? Isn't this a wonderful thing, you know?
Of course, dude. I'm hyped. I'm excited. There's gonna be I mean, I think there's always a lot of fun stuff to think about with basketball, but any season over the last couple of seasons has been very fun because there's really a blank slate, like a clean slate. We talk about dominance in some of these other teams in the past, especially this last decade, but like it's very open, and I think that intrigues me more than anything else. But appreciate you, man. Thank you for having me on the pod as always, brother.
You're the man. We look forward to see all of your talents on display this coming
Yeah,
season.
master of none, baby,
Uh,
master of none.
ladies and gentlemen, this has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.
We did it. We did it. Congratulations, Chuck.